Good evening, everyone. Everyone in the gallery. We'll start off with apologies. Councillor Barker.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Fillingham.
Okay, thank you. Any more apologies? Declarations of interest.
Mr. Mayor, myself, I work in NHS in Derby, so I will be removing myself from the debate on the petition.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alison Holmes.
And for the same reason as a partner.
Thank you. Right. Minutes of the previous meeting, the 20th of September. Anyone wish to move that? Councillor Graves.
Mr. Mayor, I wish to make a personal statement of explanation in respect of the Council Minute 4417 of the Annual Report of the Standards Committee under Rule CP 65. It's nothing controversial, Mr. Mayor.
Go on then. In that case.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just make some corrections. Councillor Pegg made some remarks about me and about the complaint made against me at the Standards Committee. Unfortunately, checking the facts and speaking truthfully is not a strong point of his. When he said I had not apologised in regards to former Councillor Titley, the Standards report clearly states that I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to put the record straight.
Thank you. Where were we? Yeah, anyone wish to move the minutes of the previous meeting? Councillor Shanker. Yeah, everyone okay with the minutes? Okay, thank you. Right, announcements from the Mayor. Very sadly, since we've last met, two of our former councillors, two of our former mayors of Derby have passed away, sadly. Norman Glenn, who was the mayor 1982 to 83, and Nancy Warman, 87 to 88. In terms of Nancy Warman, there were quite a few members of staff and members who stood on the council steps last week as the hearse came past the council house, and then I attended the funeral as the mayor. I believe there's one or two people who'd like to speak. Robin, who spoke very eloquently at the funeral, I'd like to say as well. We'll go Robin first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I represent the ward of Oakwood. I wouldn't be doing so had it not been for Nancy Warman. She was elected to represent Bredsall ward before Oakwood existed, and Bredsall eventually ceased to exist and Oakwood started to exist. Now, you could say a lot of things about Nancy, and I'm sure a lot of colleagues will. Shrinking violet will not be one of the terms used. She always got what she wanted, but she didn't get it for herself. She didn't even get it for her party, but she got it for other people, the people that actually lived in her area. Now, at the time in the 80s, when what was to become Oakwood was being planned, she and I were both on the planning committee, which was a very different thing in those days. We used to meet in room 5, none of the grandstanding we have nowadays, and everything came before a committee. Very little was delegated, which meant that every little development in Oakwood came before us. She and I were on a site visit where we went round the fields looking at what would become Oakwood. And she said, those trees have got to stay, that grass has got to stay, nobody's living near there, and she gave reasons for it. She gave reasons as a mother that she wanted places for kids to play and for their mothers to be able to see, or their parents as we should say now, to be able to see where they were. What is important about this was that she wasn't doing it for herself. She knew that the type of houses that were going to be built there would actually turn around and bite her. And that happened in 1988. While she was mayor, she lost her seat at Bredsall because for the first time the demographics of that area meant that people voted for a different party, which happened to be my party. It meant that as mayor, she was no longer a member of the council, and that very day I had lunch with her, and she wasn't downhearted at all. She was a little disillusioned, maybe, but she was very pleased at what she had achieved for the people of Oakwood. And I think, really, the people of Oakwood have been represented by some oddballs over the years, present company accepted. One became a member of Parliament, one became a priest. One had a short stay in one of Her Majesty's establishments. But nonetheless, I think we can all quite modestly say what we've done for Oakwood, but what Nancy did for Oakwood, the present people of Oakwood have a lot to thank her for. I, for some reason, became acting chairman of the Equal Opportunities Committee in the 80s under a Labour leadership, which was a bit strange. And we did a fact-finding visit to the London Borough of Lambeth. At that time, it was being led by what even they called themselves the loony left. Linda Bellos was the leader of Lambeth Borough Council. Now, you may not know that Nancy, long before she came to Derby, stood many times to be a councillor, unsuccessfully, in the London Borough of Lambeth. So she knew the area extremely well. Well, we went to the Brixton Town Hall as a delegation, and Linda Bellos would not speak to anybody who happened to be male. So I was kept at the door. And when she found out I was a Conservative, that was beyond the pale. But Nancy had a little word in her ear, and now I shall never know what those words were. But we ended that afternoon with me and Linda Bellos having cups of tea, deciding on what should happen for equal opportunities quite successfully. So, yes, Nancy has done a great deal for Derby and for Oakwood in particular. Norman Glenn started as a county councillor for Littleover, which you could do in 1967 to 68, and then came on to the Borough Council when Littleover came into Derby, because the younger ones of you won't realise that until 1968, Littleover was outside Derby. And he was Borough Councillor for Borough and eventually City Councillor for Littleover until 1979. And then there were boundary changes, and from having 3 members on this council for Littleover, there were only going to be 2, so there was a selection committee, and the boundaries changed a little bit. And there was a bit of an upstart, a young chap with a beard, actually won, and Norman lost his seat. I was elected and he wasn't. But such was the determination of Norman that he stood at the same time for Mickleover, which he continued to serve for a considerable time until 91, in fact, becoming first leader of our group in 79, and never leader of the council. He was always leader in opposition, and then standing as deputy mayor and eventually mayor. He was seen long after around Littleover doing things still for Littleover people. He delivered prescriptions in his classic Mark I Cortina. He didn't charge for that. He did it as, again, a service to the local people. He had a Mark I Cortina. He didn't buy it as a classic car. He bought it as a new car and never got rid of it, which was part of his character. So 2 people, 2 Scottish people, 2 Scottish mayors of Derby. To lose 1 is a misfortune. To lose 2 is a disaster. But perhaps on the day when the price of whiskey has gone down, we can think of them both.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, to the families of both Norman Glenn and Nancy Warman, my heartfelt condolences, and I'm sure everybody here will join me in that. Norman Glenn I didn't really know very well, but Nancy is somebody I knew very well. Firstly, in 1973 was the time that not only Nancy got elected onto the City Council, but also my father. Nirmal Dinser, and Nancy's son-in-law, John Ireland. And I think that was a special time for me in the sense that Nancy was a character with Scottish traits which, even though she spent a lot of time in England, her Scottish accent grew stronger and more visible the more upset or more excited she got in terms of her passion for fighting for the people of Derbyshire, in particular Bredsall. And Nancy and my father built up quite a relationship because, not least because both of them enjoyed Scotch whisky. And there was often time when they were when they socialized that they would get together and have a good banter, telling the jokes and their experiences of being in Scotland and for my dad, the Punjab. And they were characters who broke, in my opinion, a lot of boundaries, because Nancy, in 1973, to become a councillor, and probably there weren't many women councillors around at that time, and she represented not only her constituents, but did a great service to the whole city. And she continued to do that even when she lost her seat beyond that, because through her own work and the Warman family and the Ireland family, John Ireland was also a very great stalwart who passed away a few years ago as well. They were a family that contributed to the life of Derby City, and Nancy was strong. And I think officers, now we do think officers and councillors' relationships are a bit more muted, shall I say, than what they were in those days. And both Nancy and my father Nirmal were two examples who had a great, robust and strong relationship with officers, particularly planning committee, where I think things happen a lot different to the way that they happen now. And I think they'd be probably out of place in today's politics, but in the politics of the 70s and the 80s, they were characters who made a great contribution, and Nancy was held with great affection, and she contributed so immensely to Derby, and she will be missed by myself, the Labour Party, and Derby as a whole.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I knew both of these former mayors, and they both had different characters. Yes, both Scottish, both proud of the cities of their birth, but they worked hard for Derby. Norman, as is mentioned, had a Mark I Cortina, which he was very, very proud of and showed it off on many occasions. He continued his work after leaving the council, and I became involved with Norman and Nancy with regard to the Friends of the Burma Star Association. My father was a member of the Burma Star Association, having fought out there during the Second World War. They were called the Forgotten Army, but believe me, with Norman and Nancy trumpeting their exploits, they were not forgotten in Derby. Nancy had a reputation, and I worked with Nancy on the county council when she was a councillor, and I know she had a reputation here with officers, but believe me, when Nancy went on the warpath, even the county council officers ducked under their desk. She was extremely forthright. And when she left the council, she took up with Friends of Chaddeston Park, and again, as I say, the Friends of Burma Star, and worked tirelessly for her community. There is one anecdote that a former mayor's officer relates about Nancy getting onto a bus full of soldiers, serving soldiers, and she lit up a cigarette, and this is outside the council house where the mayor currently parks his car. And as she lit up, the mayor's officer banged on the window and said, "No, you can't do that." Nancy replied with a suitable visual hand signal to indicate that she would not be putting the cigarette out. Nancy, I will always remember at election time. I'm the only current councillor that has a blue rosette made by Nancy's fair hand, and I wear that proudly at elections, and I will continue to wear that. She made lots of red ones, but as far as I'm aware, there are only 2 blue ones in existence, mine and the current MP for Mid Derbyshire. Nancy, Norman, we'll miss you both.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Keith, I'll see you first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Both Norman Glenn and Nancy Warman were both serving at the time I was in the 70s and 80s, which was Derby Borough Council, then became Derby City Council. The first person, well, if I talk about Norman Glenn first, unfortunately I only found out yesterday, so I've not been able to sort of go back in the information I've got to, I've got time to talk about him, but he was a dour Scotsman, as I remember him. He worked at Rolls-Royce as a draftsman, and he was very, very technical, and if you asked him a question, he would go on for about 20 minutes to give you the answer. But he was leader, has already been spoken of by Robin. He was leader of the Conservatives for a while. I must admit I found it quite difficult to listen to what he was saying because his accent was a little bit broad, and anyway, he was very good, and we shall miss him. But Nancy Warman is a different kettle of fish. She got a larger than life character, and I must admit 42 years ago when I first joined this council, she frightened me to death. I was only a young lad then, and she frightened me to death really, because she called a spade a spade. She was a loud Scottish, she spoke with a very loud voice. You always knew she was around. But one of the funniest things that I heard or was there and witnessed was when I was chairman of the General Purposes Subcommittee. At that time, they looked after the markets as well as Christmas decorations and door supervisors. And I was with the markets manager. And at that time, in December, the Mayor of Derby would auction off the prize bull. And I'd gone as the General Purposes Subcommittee Chairman, and I was round the bull ring talking to Dennis Wardle, I think it was, who was the markets manager at that time. And she came over to speak to us. And while she was speaking to us, they let the bull out, just at the back. And the bull wandered round the ring, and Nancy didn't see this bull until the bull got right up close to Nancy and sort of either brushed past her or just made a noise. And she looked round and she went, "Flipping heck," or words to that effect, and punched the bull. And the bull went, "What?" you know, and ran back through the gate. Well, it was the funniest thing I'd seen with Nancy, but I shall miss her. I mean, I've seen her a few times since. And I've got to say that when she wasn't being the Mayor of Derby, or when she wasn't being a councillor, either for Derbyshire County Council or the City Council, she used to go with the Derby Serenaders. She was a big band expert as he walked through the streets of Derby, and she was always speaking to everybody there. We'll miss them both, and the problem is, it could be me next. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
On that note, we'll move on. Councillor Kerr.
And I was on the county council at the same time as Nancy when I was a very new councillor, and I have the sort of recollections that people have given about Nancy are so true. It's really, really good. But Norman is somebody I didn't know on the council. I wasn't elected until he had stopped being councillor, but he's in Littleover, and he was really supportive when I was first on the council. And he suggested things to me. He was such a community-minded person that there were times when I felt that he was using me to be able to ensure that something that he felt needed to happen got itself into the council and got itself moving forward. And that sort of support, and it was not political support, it was community support, is really valuable. And it was both of them, you know, had their hearts in the community, doing things for the people of Derby. And, well, that's what mayors should be, what we should all be. And they were both really good people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, when I was first elected to this council, I think Nancy Warman was probably one of the first councillors I noticed, apart from those obviously in my own group. As has been said, she was indeed a larger-than-life character, and quite a formidable character at that as well, but had a good heart. And I think one of the things I will always remember sitting in the old council chamber, especially if the meeting was going on a bit, a bag of boiled sweets would start being passed around across all the benches, initiated by Nancy. So that usually happened at most meetings. So I think that's one of my memories of her. She will be missed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for the contributions. I'd like you to join me in a minute's silence now, please. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who attended the Remembrance Sunday event we had, and everyone who was involved in planning it and organising it, and all the members that attended. That's excellent. Just very quickly, fundraising wise for my charities, the quiz is just about sold out now, so if you really want a ticket, there was 4 left earlier today, which is fantastic, so thanks to everyone that's coming already. We're going to the Slice of India on the 7th of December, which is going pretty well as well. So many thanks to everyone who's already got tickets for that. So things are going very, very well. Many thanks. Right, we'll move on. Statements from members of the Council Cabinet. There are none. And item 6 is the petition. Just to say how this is going to work, there will be a lead petitioner who will speak for 5 minutes. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. And then we'll have up to half an hour to debate and take a vote on the petition. So that's how it's going to go. Yes, I think so. Yes. Peter, can I invite you to speak as lead petitioner?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me upstairs? Good. Right. I'd like to thank you very much for allowing us to present and talk about the petition. This petition, this is part of it. There's a box. You can all come and see it. But actually, we've collected thousands and thousands. We've got, if you were printed out, that's gone up online, would be 136 pages. There's more than 4,000 in Derby, and there's about 8,000 or 9,000 in Derbyshire, and the petition is still growing. And it shows that people care about what is a fundamentally important thing that we take for granted, that's the NHS. And as I go through the evening, in the next few minutes, I'll talk about some of the erosion that's happened to the NHS and urge you to sympathise. I don't want to get stuck particularly in the petition itself because it's a little bit out of date. It asked you to not sign up to the SDP. Well, you've signed up. You were wrong in our view, but nevertheless, let's not get caught up in that. And the advice you've had is that legally you had to sign up. It's not true. There's certain councils in this country have not signed up, and they've given a wonderful lead to the community by making a stand. But that's, I want to move on from that. Let's just talk about actually what's happening to us and stand back and think about our NHS. Think about how the funding has been reduced. We now spend a smaller proportion of our money on the NHS than most of our European neighbours. That was a decision made by politicians for various reasons. I won't go into it, but the fact is it has an impact upon our NHS. And talk to anybody, and I've got members of the family who've been suffering all sorts of ways, one way or another. When my son, and I don't want to get sidetracked by talking about myself, but when my son has a mental health problem, he was moved up to Bradford because I couldn't see him. There wasn't a bed for him in Derby. It's not about myself, it's about us. This is what's happening to our community. We are being attacked one way or another. Also what you're seeing is an enormous cutback and incredible expensive inefficiencies. You're seeing agency staff and you're seeing consultants from outside coming in at terrible, terrible costs. I know of a story or I've heard the story from a nurse of how they couldn't get any sandwiches for people at night, and they had to buy a sandwich, and it cost them £37 to buy a sandwich for somebody at night because it's outsourced. Now these stories are ridiculous, and you know, the inefficiency of privatization and the turning of the NHS around to privatize it is being very, very costly. It's been estimated that 1/3 of the new management costs are trying to create the internal and the external markets inside the NHS. So what's happening there is, well, I'll just change tack slightly. The government has got an agenda to save, that's the wrong word, cut £22 billion from the costs. And it's got to implement that, and it's using various means. And remember Mr. Cameron said that what we're not going to do is reorganise the NHS. But what you're seeing is reorganisation. And one of the latest plots is called the STPs, and I'll need to just cover that very briefly. The STP sounds fantastic in some ways. There come out some really good lines, like what we need is joined up thinking. That's revolutionary. And that's what we need. We do need joined up thinking. There's a barrier between social services and the NHS. We need joined up thinking. It's also come up, with things like what you need to do is you need to stop bed blocking. And bed blocking is an issue. If you go to Royal Derby Hospital, they say that of the 450 beds that are there, 50 of those beds could be vacated if we could put those people outside. But nevertheless, this is done in the context of enormous, enormous cuts, which I've already mentioned some of them. And one of the arguments that's coming through, and it's the thing that we're really sticking on and trying to get you to focus on, is what's happening to our beds. Because the SDP is talking about getting rid of 30% of the beds in Derbyshire. Can I say that again? 30%. That is nearly a third of the beds in Derbyshire over the next 4 years. And it's even, if you look at page 58 in the report, it's said which sections of the community are going to lose the beds, which hospital sections. We cannot allow that. We have to shout and make a noise about that. A 30%.
Okay.
Yes.
Peter, thank you very much.
Right.
5 minutes up, but thank you for your contribution. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, I know, but it's 5 minutes. Sorry, it's time limited. No, sorry, we're going to move on. Apologies, we're going to carry on. We're going to stick to the time. We're going to stick to the time. Do we have anyone who's going to move the motion that Councillor Shanker? Do you wish to speak? We've got half an hour to get through this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Mr. Robinson and the 4,179 people who have signed the petition. Can I just formally move that we consider and debate the motion as printed in 2.2 of the report?
Thank you. Any seconder? Yeah, Councillor Repton?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I've got an amendment I'd like to put.
Okay. We'll put it on the big screen so you can see it. Have a seconder for this amendment. Okay, Councillor Boland. Councillor Upton, do you want to speak, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was saying to our colleagues in the gallery out on the steps earlier this evening, on the 5th of July 1948, the NHS was born. The midwives were that radical, forward-thinking, progressive Labour government in 1945. It was a beacon of hope and inspiration during those dark and depressing days just after the Second World War. And millions of people have benefited from it. With envy, the world and many countries have copied the NHS system in this country. Fast forward almost 70 years, and the NHS has its problems, major problems. And these are compounded by the current government's underfunding of the NHS. As the Cabinet Member for Integrated Health and Care, and as a Labour administration, we're concerned about the NHS not being funded properly and totally agree with the principles underlying the petition submitted to Council. As an administration, we're actively campaigning for a properly funded, robust, publicly owned, free at the point of need NHS that holds true to the fundamental principles on which the NHS was founded in 1948. Over the past 12 months, I've personally met members of a range of local organisations to discuss the SDP, raising Labour's concerns about insufficient funding to the NHS and adult social care. The funding crisis is well documented and has been discussed innumerable times in this chamber, whether that is the NHS being asked to save £22 billion over the next 5 years, or the fact that £4.5 billion has already been cut. £4.5 billion has already been cut from council adult social care budgets nationally. There has been a vibrant chorus of well-informed and respected voices, coming from the King's Fund, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, NHS, AIDAS and the British Medical Association. But sadly, this does not resonate with the government or result in the scale of action needed. Under the last Labour government, the NHS budget was increased by 4% a year. 4% a year under Labour. Since 2010, the budget has only gone up by 1%. 1%, a quarter of what it was prior to 2010. I personally believe and recommend that SOS, NHS Derby and the county joins me to actively campaign for the reinstatement of an annual increase to the NHS budget of 4%. A YouGov poll this weekend showed that 58% of the public were in favour of a 1% increase in national insurance, with 48% of people in favour of increasing income tax to deal with the problems and pressures our NHS and adult care are facing. What appears to be lacking from our government is any emotional or human compassion or intelligence of the real situation facing the gravely ill, the disabled, the elderly and the vulnerable. The real underlying issue is that in this city and elsewhere, many people are waiting longer and longer to get basic access to health and social care, suffering pain and hardship and isolation in the process. This is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. What the Labour administration has been trying to do is urge the government to react immediately and proportionately to the scale and depth of the crisis we are facing in adult care. And to that end, myself and my colleague in Nottingham, who is now the MP for Nottingham North, wrote to David Mowat, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Community and Health. We haven't had a meaningful response back, and that, I think, reflects the government's lack of initiative or lacks the concerns that we do. What we want to be on a par with other European countries. For every £100 that we pay for health in this country, Germany pays £130. This council aims to support more people in its own home, close to home where it's safe and appropriate to do so. And to this end, we will make the changes necessary. But we have to have the funding. And the funding to do this is simply not there. We need to support more people. We should support more people at home where it's safe and appropriate to do so. But we need that funding. My group, and hopefully this council, supports the principle of the petition regarding unnecessary cuts to an already underfunded health service. And the Cabinet and I will continue to make strong representations to the government ministers, insisting that the STP is not used as a Trojan horse to disguise further cuts to these services and move towards privatisation. I move the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton, do you wish to speak? Or... Okay. Any other speakers? Okay, so we'll vote on the amendment, yeah? Oh, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It would be nice if we could believe what Councillor Repton is saying. I sit on the Health and Wellbeing Board for this city, and at a joint meeting in October last year, the STP, before it was signed off, was put before us, Derby and Derbyshire. At that point, it was mentioned very clearly about the transformation of services across the city and the county, about bringing services closer to home, about the transition from beds in hospitals to support in the community. The social care team in this city has seen £22 million of additional money this year, next year and the year after. That was reported to the Adults and Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee of this City Council. The NHS today, in total, has been offered an extra £2.8 billion of funding. £350 million for winter pressures this year, 1.6 billion in 2018-19 and a further 850 million in 1920. The pay in the NHS has been an issue, and they are restricted currently to a 1% pay rise. The Chancellor today, has said that if there is wage negotiations following the representations that will be made to government about pay rises, that those negotiations and anything above the 1% will not come out of the revenue budget. That would be funded by government. With regard to the Sustainability and Transformation Plan, we would all like to see people cared for closer than home. And it has been said time and time again by myself that until we've got the services on the ground within the community, that the STP cannot move forward. And I sympathise with the petitioners, and I would support that part of this motion. But what I cannot support is the last paragraph about smoke screens and funding reductions. I cannot understand where this has come from. This is not something that would be supportable. Government has given this council additional money. I've told you what it is. Where that money is being spent within this council is not detailed. I cannot find out, and our Section 151 officer is unable to give detail of where that funding is going to. We know where it comes from, but we don't know where it's going to. And that should be used to support the transformation of services from NHS to community services. And when it comes to the transformation plan, it was the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board of this council who said we must move forward with this.
Excellent timing, Councillor Webb. You're just out of time. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to talk about two broad things. One is the Sustainability and Transformation Plan, and secondly is the situation for the NHS at the moment. I think there's agreement that we would like people to be kept healthier, and we'd like people to be able to be treated as close to home as it's practical and safe and effective to do so. And those are the underlying hopes of the STP. But all the way through the process, and I wasn't there at the beginning of it, I joined the Health and Wellbeing Board a little bit in, I was amazed by two things. Firstly, at how prescriptive what we had to do in Derbyshire was. It was micromanaged as a process from London. Yes, it was happening here, but we were being told very clearly what was expected of us, not what was needed for the people of Derby or Derbyshire, but what they wanted us to do. And that was my first concern. My second concern is that it was incredibly top-down. Senior managers were involved, not people at the front line. People at the front line who are dealing with patients can often see where some of the inefficiencies are, some where the opportunities are. But they weren't being involved. It was a top-down process. And I didn't know why we weren't actually telling people about what was going on, why we weren't consulting people at an early stage to gather those ideas. And again, it was the micromanagement, I understand, from London that said, no, you're not allowed to do consultation at this stage. You've got to get on with doing the plan. And I think that was all wrong, because the vision of keeping people healthier and treating people as close to home as is practicable, those are things that we want. The problem is how we get there, and the way in which this was being micromanaged is not the way to get there. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the wider NHS issue. And I don't know how many people have listened to the news this week, but we are seeing things happening now as a result of the Brexit decision. And one of them is, well, we knew there was a suggestion we would get millions of pounds more for the NHS because of Brexit, but now it's turning around the other way. We are seeing the costs of Brexit. We are losing the European Medicine Agency, so it's going to be harder to know how we are going to monitor, how we're going to approve our medicines. We know that we are losing staff, we're losing people who are EU but not UK citizens who have been working in our NHS. They no longer are coming to work here to provide us with the healthcare that we need. And these are things that are happening because of another element of national government. There was a statement out from the CBI today. They're expecting a million jobs to disappear from the UK economy. If we lose 1 million jobs, that could be 1 million people who are now on the dole. And that means that they will be taking money from the Exchequer, and we won't have the money we need for the NHS. We've got to look at the whole thing as a round, and we need to expect our national politicians to look at the whole thing in the round, and I do not believe they're doing it at the moment. Back in the general election earlier this year, the Liberal Democrats knew that we needed more funding for the NHS, not just piecemeal funding, a lump sum here, a lump sum there, which can somehow disappear and be mentioned again under a different heading. We know we need more base level funding, and we said we need a penny on income tax for the NHS, not lump sums, but there as base funding. And if we know that we've got more funding coming in, then we've got the capacity to be able to make the changes, to be able to keep people healthier, and to be able to treat people nearer to home. But we haven't had that as a process. So there is my concern about the STP and the process that is going through. And there is my concern about the NHS and the inability of the current government and any government that is pushing for a hard Brexit above everything else to actually have the revenue to look after the NHS that we all want. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, can I say to Councillor Webb, sterling effort trying to protect defend your government, but the reality is £2.8 billion has a way of trying to respond to the needs of the health service, and our NHS is too little and goes nowhere near to the 20 to 30 billion pounds that are being required to actually make sure that we have a good, effective service that the people of this country require and need. The Sustainability and Transformation Plan is neither sustainable or transformational without the money to follow it up. And I know from some of the issues that I face in terms of the policing and criminal justice system, the mental health issues which end up in our police cells and in the criminal justice system should not be there if the NHS were able to provide the facilities not only of care but also of beds for people who are actually ending up in our cells, and that takes days and days before they find a bed. And they don't find a bed in Derby, they find a bed somewhere or anywhere in the country. That can't be right. And the Sustainable transformation plan has, by any professional's opinion, never going to succeed if the right amount of funding is not available. So even the 4% which has been suggested within this motion to increase in terms of funding for the NHS will still require a long, long time before we can get sustainability and transformation in our health services and in our social care services. So we've really got to concentrate to say how we can actually convince the government that the amount they've announced today, by the way, which 350 million or so is for winter contingencies, which is every year. It's not something that happens just one year. And why should that happen if it's properly funded in the first place? That shouldn't be needed. We should have the appropriate funding in place in the first place. So therefore, I think I will invite everybody in this chamber to really support the SOS for the NHS campaign and support Councillor Repton's amendment to the motion that we should fight wherever we can, through letters to government, through other campaigns, to make sure the NHS is properly funded, properly resourced, so that people who rely on it, free at the source of use, can benefit in the way they should do, rather than actually being waiting around in A&E, waiting around for beds, whether it's mental health beds or other beds, waiting around to get social care provision in the community. So I say, everybody in this chamber, please support this motion. We need to get the message of the people of Derby and Derbyshire, because the petition has gone wider than that, and the campaigners for SOS, to say we need to make sure we look after our people by funding fairly and appropriately the NHS that we are all proud of. Mr. Mayor, please, I don't know how much time we've got left. We should really move to the motion so that we don't actually lose the right to vote on this particular motion. Thank you.
We'll definitely have a vote, don't worry. We'll definitely get a vote in, don't worry. Councillor Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first comment on this agenda item, Mr. Mayor, is that it's rather odd that of all petitions that have been blocked due to the Labour Party rule changes, it's this petition that has been allowed to be discussed, even though it doesn't fit into any of the criteria you have set. Nevertheless, here we are, and it's the petition my group supports. In fact, Councillor Evans and I joined one of the marches earlier this year from the Royal Hospital to the city centre. We were the only councillors to support that march. It's a shame that Councillor Repton wasn't so vocal in the early days. It was interesting that the people who were non-partisan welcomed us with open arms, whereas Labour Party members, two in particular, were very uncomfortable at us being there, and shall I say, were less than hospitable. I am pleased that this group recognised there are areas of the NHS spending where money is wasted, and they should be trying to bring efficiencies where they can. My own recent experience has found that once you get to meet the medical professional you need, the treatment and service is of an exceptional high quality. The problem I experienced is the deliberate policy of delay, probably due to lack of availability of those professionals. I do agree with the statement that the NHS is bursting at the seams, and there is urgent need to invest in the NHS. If only the government would stop shilly-shallying with the EU and remove us from the exorbitant costs attributed to membership. Mrs. May seems to be making it worse by agreeing to pay for longer than the Article 50 allowed. We should use this money to help our NHS. We should also recognise that a great deal of pressure comes from increasing number of migrants that enter the shores. The NHS is one of those public services that suffers...
Okay, let's have some order, please.
The NHS is one of those public services that suffers from the hands of over 5,000 new people settling every week. Well, it's very interesting.
Can we let Councillor Graves speak, please?
It's very interesting that people mention the numbers. I don't know where Councillor Kerr got her figures from, but the number of foreign doctors and nurses that are working in the NHS has increased. Whilst I accept it is not the whole reason, but you can surely see that the increase in population by such a high volume, whilst cutting budgets of services such as the NHS, the effect is not positive. Another major issue is the topic of bed blocking, which I think has already been mentioned, which this council can influence. If the council beefed up its activity in getting convalescing patients back to their homes in a more timely manner, there would be more beds available for other patients. The last request of this petition is to oppose privatisation. We, on my side, wholeheartedly support this aim, but I have to mention that the biggest privatisation of the NHS was under a Labour government, and so find their rhetoric a little disingenuous. This is the problem when you elect weasel politicians into office. We fully support this petition to distance ourselves to cut hospital beds, to invest in the NHS with real budget increases alongside cutting waste. And we oppose the privatisation of the NHS and any weasel words that politicians might use to disguise that aim. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashburner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having taken the amended version of the petition up to the gallery, they were pleased to receive that, to see what we're now voting on. Secondly, we should, earlier on, mention was made of agency staffing. Having worked with the main staff banking system in the Birmingham area, main NHS staff banking system in the Birmingham area, a main priority for them is cutting down on numbers of agency staff. This is easier said than done. Eventually you have to take on a few agency staff to keep a ward functioning. A bit of history. In 1990, Ken Clarke, then Conservative Health Secretary, created an internal market. The policy, the idea being that parts of the NHS that pay for services are separated from the providers of the medical services. From 1997, the Labour added vast sets of targets with tariffs for each procedure to reward the most active hospitals. The coalition of 2010-15 devolved more of the NHS budget to local groups of clinicians. Today, 2/3 of its spending is done via 207 clinical commissioning groups. I come from Lancashire, and in the Morecambe Bay area, a Vanguard group has been set up by the NHS, reducing emergency hospital admissions by some 23%. This wise outcome has been achieved largely by better communications. Hopefully something like that will be done in Derby. The NHS is not a single homogeneous body that people often think of it as. It comprises some 7,500 general practices, which are independent contractors, 233 trusts, such as hospitals and other direct providers of services, many of which, incidentally, were originally built using PFI money, which has still not been paid off, and some 850 companies, private companies and charities. I've also worked with many of those, one of which, for example, made beds, so I can't see why that should necessarily be best done inside the NHS. And other bodies which provide care on behalf of the NHS. So it's not a single homogeneous group. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Poulter, you've got 4 minutes. Just squeeze you in.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Is that working? I hope not to take 5 minutes and scupper the situation. Mr. Mayor, I couldn't let this go without a personal statement, really, and that is one of thanks and congratulations to the NHS in Derby for the services and the quality of services that they provide. Personally, I don't think there's anybody in this room, possibly, that's had more benefit out of the NHS in the last few years, in the last couple of years, and my experience of that service has been absolutely exemplary, and I can't thank them enough. In terms of the debate tonight, Mr. Mayor, my group would have been more than happy to agree to recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 as printed. Unfortunately, somebody's taken the opportunity to expand on them unnecessarily. 2.1 spells out perfectly clearly the Council's position in relation to this. We are hamstrung in terms of what we can and can't do. So the value of the debate that we've had already tonight and any extension of that debate is debatable. I mean, there's nothing our hands are tied. We have listened to the petitioners. My group are more than happy to listen to people who have these concerns, and I have to say, I would have preferred it. I know that the petition is limited to 5 minutes, but I would have liked to have heard the summary of the petition's thoughts on this tonight. So, in summary, Mr. Mayor, it's unfortunate that the amendment has come. We would have liked to support these recommendations, but because it's unnecessarily been amended, and some people, like the Police Crime Commissioner, have taken the opportunity to grandstand on the issue and whatever. Our group will be abstaining on this motion tonight. But we call, because there's little point in further debate, all the groups have had a say. I call on you, Mr. Mayor, to move to the vote and deal with this now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We'll do that. So we'll have a vote on the motion as amended.
Mr. Mayor, recorded vote, please.
Oh, okay.
Well, it has not been amended yet. You're voting on the amendment.
On the amendment, sorry. Vote on the amendment.
Yeah. So you still want to record your vote on the amendment?
On the amendment. So now we're voting on the amendment.
We're voting on the amendment only.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so right, this isn't a recorded vote, this is just a vote on the amendment. Okay, so show of hands, all those in favour of the amendment. No, that's two. Okay, you're right. And all those against? Right, we'll now go to the substantive motion as amended. And
recorded vote, Mr. Mayor.
10 people?
Would members please indicate whether they are for or against the motion as amended, as I read out the names. Councillor Afzal? For. Councillor Anderson? For. Councillor Ashburner? For. Councillor Banwaite? For. Councillor Barker? Abstain. Councillor Bayliss? Councillor Bolton? For. Councillor Kerr? For. Councillor Carr? Sorry? For. Councillor Ginza? Councillor Eldred? Councillor Evans? For. Councillor Froggatt? Councillor Graves? For. Councillor Grimmadale? Abstain. Councillor Harwood? Abstain. Councillor Hassel? Abstain. Councillor Hazelgrave? For. Councillor Alison Holmes? Oh, yeah. Councillor Hudson? Abstain. Councillor Hussain? For. Councillor Ingle? Councillor Jackson? For. Councillor Keith? Councillor Jahangir Khan? Councillor Shiraz Khan? Councillor Marshall? Councillor Nater? Councillor Nawaz? Councillor Pegg? Councillor Potter? Councillor Poulter? Councillor Raju? Councillor Rawson? Councillor Repton? Councillor Ralston? Councillor Russell? Councillor Sandhu? Councillor Skelton. Councillor Smale. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Turner. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Williams.
Abstain.
Councillor Willoughby.
Abstain.
Councillor Winter. Councillor Wood.
Abstain.
The Mayor, Councillor Whitby.
4. Thank you, that's carried.
£5 to the Mayor's Fund.
Press phone.
Oh, crikey, yeah. It was my timer. Right. Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to questions from the public to members of Council Cabinet. If they're all in there. I'll just wait a second.
Just give them a minute.
Okay, thank you. Can the first question is from David Gale. Do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Rawson?
I do, thank you, Mr Mayor. David Gale, a resident of Alveston Ward. My supplementary question. Did the Council's due diligence checks identify the actual total cost of building the copper box at 1 Friegate Square as £4.7 million as opposed to the £20 million cost reported by the local media? And did those same checks identify that the now dissolved Isle of Man-based developer was in part funded by entities from Monaco and the British Virgin Islands, whose details are included within the Panama Papers money laundering database?
Thank you for your question, Mr Gale, and I have to say, no, I wasn't aware of that. The contract was signed back in January of 2012, as I understand it, so that is perhaps a question for the Conservative administration of the time who were in control of the council. But I have to say that the loan has been repaid in full to the council. The local authority has received a good rate of interest paid on that loan, and we have, of course, the regeneration benefits of the building, and the University of Derby having moved into that building. So overall, from the city's point of view, it has been a good deal, and one that I think we can all be proud of.
Okay. Next question is Mr Connolly. Do you have a supplementary for Councillor Afzal?
I do, sir. What's happened in the last 2 years about the toilets at Nottingham Road and the costing you informed this chamber about over 12 months ago?
Yeah, thank you for your supplementary question, Mr Connolly. I'm aware that officers have actually got some figures now, and we will be presenting them to the appropriate cabinet member to look at it to see if it's going to be viable for us to continue with that project. Thank you.
You're saying that there's some figures now and they're going to be passed to the appropriate cabinet member to see if we can... The other cabinet member. To see if it's viable. Sorry, it's not councillor. Lynn Evans, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Afzal? George Morland, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Shanker?
Yes, I do. As a former taxi driver, married to an ex-taxi licensing clerk, I'm probably privy to more honest information than your councillor. There have been instructions to curtail background checks on taxi drivers, and the only reason for councillors to short-circuit tried, tested and fair procedures is to influence voters in their ward. This is a return to 19th century England when there were...
Excuse me, I've got a question. I've got a question. Is there a question?
Yes, why have they short-circuited this tried and tested system? And secondly, with regard to the answer...
There's only one, there's only one. Can we have the answer to the question? Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Mr. Morland. I don't think any systems have been short-circuited. In the last year or so, the taxi licensing regime in this city has been considerably improved for the safety of the residents that use the service.
Okay. Okay, next question is from Rob Cooper. Have you got, Mr. Cooper, have you got a supplementary for Councillor Shanker?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. With the recent report that an elected member has overspent in the last financial year considerably the amount allowed, will the Cabinet Member for Governance demand that any overspend is refunded by that elected member?
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. A very important role of councillors is to communicate with the residents they represent. It's something you continue to aspire to do, whether it's with UKIP or whether it's with the Conservatives or maybe with some other party at some other time. The work the councillors do is really important, and communicating with its residents is equally as important.
Carol Fenton, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Afzal?
Yes, please. The first question I submitted in September, it made no sense, the answer I received then, and I was quite annoyed about it, so I'm here again. Slightly better, this answer, but it still doesn't answer what the question I've asked.
It's a supplementary question.
I want to get the council, you've got the Disabled Equality Act that I'm looking at, that's supposed to give us easy access to places we need to go if you're in receipt of a blue badge, which I am, and also to be closer to your home. This has been denied me on my car park, and I've spent 3 years telling the council about this, and I've got nowhere with them. Nowhere. I mean, they keep talking about...
Yeah, sorry, have you got a question? Yeah?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
When is somebody from the council coming to knock on my door, speak to me personally, find out what my issue is, help me get able-bodied people off that parking space, which I am struggling to get on for the last 3 years? And once I've got somebody to come and listen to me, instead of writing answers that are incorrect. I mean, the Equality Act is there for disabled drivers. So, and then once we get that one sorted out, I want them to look at the second car park where there are 3 disabled people, one with a child in a wheelchair that is struggling.
Okay.
Every part of this is always about...
Listen, sorry, we're not having a statement, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Afzal.
Mrs. Fenton, I'm quite happy to meet you outside the meeting and we can discuss all the issues you raise. Thank you. I'm quite happy to meet you outside the meeting.
Okay, he'll meet you. Thank you. Next question, Mr. Bacon, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Afzal?
I have, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Being a friend of Derby Arboretum, I have noticed an increase in drinking and antisocial behaviour and fear it could get worse with the PSPO without strong focus. Will the council confirm that all CCTV in the park will be fully operational to support not only the upkeep of the PSPO, but those working to improve the park, such as Friends of Derby Arboretum?
Yes.
There you go. Mr. Ball, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Russell?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, the response I've received is poor and it's not answered the question that I asked. I was already aware of the council's plan for Brackensdale. I've asked why the council thinks that removing these places fits the aim that they've outlined themselves. Could the Cabinet member please outline why this option is better for SEN pupils in the City of Derby?
Good evening, Mr. Bull. It's nice to see you again. Welcome to the council chamber. I've heard about all your escapades speaking at party conferences here and there for your friends, the Liberal Democrats, so well done to you for doing that. It's great to have you back here. The council aren't removing 38 enhanced resource places, as you've highlighted in your question, and I think I've tried to explain to you the position in the response that I've written. The consultation's ongoing until the 15th of December, and I'd be delighted to meet with you to discuss the contents of that report, as I have done with various members across this chamber already, with quite a degree of success, including a parent of someone at Brackensdale and a member of staff who works at Brackensdale School as well. So I'll be happy to meet you to discuss them if that's something you'd like to take up.
Thank you. Ms. Skritek, not here. No? Okay. Mr. Connolly, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Hussain?
Yes, I have, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, can I just say there seems to be an ongoing theme about disabled people and in the city, because are the council aware that a wheelchair user who lives in a flat that has been designated as not fit for his needs for over 2 years has been unable to bid on any property as his points awards allegedly is not enough? Is this the way Derby City Council / Derby Homes treat disabled wheelchair users in the city?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I don't think I understood the question. Could you repeat your question, please?
Are the council aware that a wheelchair user who lives in a flat that has been designated as not fit for his needs? So then he came onto your waiting list, and for 2 years now he's not been able to bid on properties. A property he did look at, and the guy from here down has got no... He was number 17. So what's the other 16 people like?
Mr. Mayor, I can only generally answer this question. It's a specific question concerning a specific person, and obviously the details can only be provided by operational staff who dealt with the person in question. Generally speaking, we try to make sure that every property which is offered to a person with disability actually meets their specific needs. And we don't actually force people to accept properties which are not fully adapted to their needs. So in general, all I can say is, if this particular property doesn't meet this person's need, they need to go back to Derby Homes and get a reassessment. And hopefully they will be rehoused somewhere else.
Mr. Cooper, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Rawson?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Carol Fenton, supplementary for Councillor Hussain?
She's not here.
Oh, not here, okay. Mr. Bacon, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Afzal? I think his mic bust. No?
Oh, we're on. We've gone live. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Vital Earth compost garden and food waste in a single in-vessel process. In 2016-17, the council paid £40.52 per tonne for this. What value would the council lose if the brown bin included food waste, as the council accounts show no financial return to the council that could decrease? And could you please provide evidence of the claim you've made in relation to that contractually? Thank you.
I think I have answered your question, Mr. Bacon, because the garden recycling scheme...
Councillor Afzal.
Sorry?
Only you, Councillor Afzal.
Okay, hang on then. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. It's the high quality material that is collected through the garden recycling scheme. That's why to be mixing that with food waste, especially meat, it would not be of the same quality. So what we are trying to do is encourage people not to waste their food, and also try to compost the food in a different way, and that is the best way to go forward. But I'm quite happy to meet you outside the meeting, Simon, like we normally do, and try to find another way forward.
Thank you. Just wish to clarify. Ms Fenton, do you want a supplementary?
Yes, please. Is it to Councillor Hussain?
It's Councillor Hussain, yeah.
Councillor Hussain. I've lived on my housing estate since about 1977, 79, and I've been there when there's been issues with drugs. 80s and the early 90s was the worst ever. Now we've got 2 houses now, and they are dealing drugs on a regular basis, which I'm sure some of the council know that. But when I begin to see people with little leather bags going around trying to show people how to make spliffs and how to offer free drugs to children to get them hooked, I just want to clamp down on these people, because I don't sleep very well with my health. So quite often, even early hours of the morning, I see this happening. So I know the police are involved, but I have been waiting for quite a while, 3 weeks, for a reply from a police support officer. I'm just waiting for the, for the police to contact me. They haven't done that. And so this has been going on for 5 years in one house and probably a lot longer in the other one.
Okay, so it is a statement. I mean,
it's
I've got a question
statement, but look,
yeah,
there's
okay.
a question
I'm sorry, I
there.
apologise. We need to have a question, but if there's no question, we'll move on. Yeah?
There is a
but we've
question.
heard what you say.
What are they going to do about it?
What are you going to do about it?
Mrs. Fenton actually made a complaint in 2015, and we investigated it with the help of the police. But we didn't find enough evidence to prosecute anyone. But obviously these cases are not actually, they're not time limited, they're not closed as such. If the problem is still there, Mrs. Fenton, I'm quite happy for you to advise Derby Homes and give them the evidence, or give the police the evidence, and hopefully we can move forward. But in absence of any concrete evidence, there isn't that much we can do as Derby Homes, neither will the police be in a position to take necessary action on it. So if you've got any evidence, please present it to Derby Homes and we'll take the case forward.
Okay, thank you. That's the public questions dealt with. Item 8 is questions relating to Derbyshire Fire Authority or Derby Homes. There are none. Item 9, questions from non-council cabinet members, and the first of which requires a verbal response from Councillor Banwaite. That's right. Yeah. Councillor Graves, do you want to put the question?
Sorry, I forgot I was supposed to ask the question, aren't I? Yes, thank you. I read with interest the lack of expedient action in relation to the poor conduct of Councillor Nawaz. The Standards Committee spent many months investigating his inappropriate behaviour, and the committee presented its findings and recommendation in July 2017, that to request the group leader, Ranjit Banwaite, to remove Councillor Nawaz from all council committees. This would have the effect of removing his special responsibility allowance for being the Personnel Committee Chairman. Local press reports seem to miss this issue when Councillor Nawaz removed himself from the Planning Committee, but not the Personnel Committee. Honourable elected members normally withdraw themselves from office when they realise their mistakes, which has not happened in this instance. Furthermore, the local Derby Labour Party will not take the appropriate action required, and Councillor Nawaz continues to be paid extra allowances because of this inaction. Can you inform the Chamber and the general public what action you intend to take regarding this serious matter?
Councillor Banway.
Councillor Graves, this question is littered with inaccuracies. As you are a member of the Standards Committee, you must know about these inaccuracies. I find it disgraceful that you would be so blatantly mislead the public in the wording of your question to politicise the issue. You falsely say that the Standards Committee spent many months investigating this issue. This is totally untrue. There was no complaint about Councillor Nawaz. There was therefore no investigation. There was no hearing before the committee. There was no opportunity for Councillor Nawaz to offer mitigation. There was a single officer report recommending that the issue be noted, a report which covered 1.5 sides of A4. The minutes show that the meeting, when the report was considered, along with the 2 other major business items, lasted just over an hour. You falsely say that the committee asked me to remove Councillor Nawaz from all committees. Again, this is untrue. The minutes show that the recommendation referred to, and I quote, any or all committees. Inferring a judgment was necessary. The Labour group took advice from the Council's legal team. That advice explicitly states that the most appropriate committee for Councillor Nawaz to step down from would be the Planning Control Committee, as this is a regulatory matter, just as licensing is a regulatory matter. You falsely say that the local press have missed the issue. Again, this is untrue. The press have covered this matter extensively. It is you, Councillor Graves, who is willfully trying to rewrite history to suggest that the press have missed something which wasn't there. You falsely suggest that elected members normally withdraw themselves from office when they realise their mistakes. This is very misleading. So that normally happens, does it, Councillor Graves? What sanctions did you impose on yourself, Councillor Graves, after suggesting Councillor Eldred should not have been given a council cabinet position as a pregnant woman? You apologised for that. You accepted you made a mistake. Did you withdraw from public office or offer up part of your basic allowance? Councillor Nawaz has accepted from the outset that he made an error. The resolution is not only compliant with the Standards Committee resolution, but it is in accordance with legal advice, which was sought first. It has been dealt with as a sanction has been acted upon, and we move on like adults. This question masquerades as seeking high moral standards, but it is just a political game to you, Councillor Graves. As a long-serving member of this council, as a group leader, as a member of the Standards Committee, and as a councillor whose own conduct has frequently brought you into the limelight for all the wrong reasons, you should know better. I will be providing Mr. Mayor and officers with a copy of this response and ask that it is added to the public record. Thank you.
Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary? Right. Councillor Skelton, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Russell?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I actually submitted these as 3 separate questions. So am I to get a supplementary on each one, please? So I next time have to do it as 3 separate emails. Right, okay. Well, for the first one, I understand that the original plan was actually for about 1,500 conversions not 847. So what happened to the 653, please?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton, for your question. I'll get the detailed response from the officers who have that at their fingertips.
Okay, Councillor Barker, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Shanker?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. At least we've got Councillor Banwaite to at least talk about this issue now. He palmed it off last time. But the question I've got now for Councillor Shanker is that such a curt answer will not, in actual fact, state the public's interest in regard to the full recommendations of the Standards Committee as to the integrity of Councillor Nawaz and the upholding of principles relating to those passed by this Council, which, in actual fact, were designed to pervert corruption. Can he discuss how the shadow, as the Standards Committee Chairman and as Cabinet Member for Governance, that his answer satisfies both the Council and the public in this grave and extremely serious breach of Council conduct?
Thank you, Councillor Barker. You know my views on the Standards Committee and the Standards regime, as many councillors in this chamber share. We are looking at that and we will come back with some proposals. As to answering your question specifically about this individual case, I'd probably best refer you to the answer Councillor Banwaite has just given Councillor Graves.
Okay, Councillor Grimmadale, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Rawson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do. Good evening, Councillor Rawson. Thank you for your reply to my question. Unfortunately, the second half of my question hasn't been answered, and where I asked what representation have you received in respect of public safety measures in the city centre from the relevant ward members or the neighbourhood boards, but I'm very happy to receive that later this week, if you could look at that, or if the officers could look at that. My supplementary is to name, thank you, to name just two areas within the city centre, specifically Curzon Street, no improvement for years, and Green Lane. What improvements are to be made in those areas, and equally important, when are they to be made? Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Councillor Grimmadale, and thank you for your question. In terms of Green Lane, there's a significant amount of lottery funding actually gone into that area over recent years with the shopfront grant scheme, which has been extremely successable. There will be further improvements to Green Lane as we take forward the redevelopment of Becketwell and Duckworth Square. And in terms of Curzon Street, I'm very happy to meet with you to discuss any particular issues that you've identified with that location.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Willoughby, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Russell?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor, thank you. The Cabinet Member obviously acknowledges that this presents Derby with an opportunity. So does she think that this initiative, supported by the Conservative National Government, demonstrate their commitment to the prosperity of this city and support to it with funding in this relevant area of need, despite the gloom and doom often presented by her regime?
Good evening, Councillor Willoughby. Thank you for your question. It'd be silly of me not to say that I welcome £6 million coming into Derby to support children and young people in this city. Of course I do. But like with many other things, this government takes with one hand and gives with another. If you look at the cuts to school budgets over the last few years, £20 million was slashed every year from 2010 from the local authority budget for Education Standards Fund. Last year, we had the announcement that the Education Services Grant is going to be abolished, £4 million that goes into the system to school improvement into this city. 6 million, brilliant, drop in the ocean compared to what we've lost. Please tell your government we need more.
Thank you. Councillor Poulter, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Shanker?
I do, Mr Mayor. I'm not surprised the question didn't get answered, but it was actually designed to give you the opportunity to acknowledge the value of government grants, as Councillor Russell just has. The point of the question was to give you the opportunity to be open and honest with the public about the effect of budgetary matters, the effect of the budgetary matters that the wide variety and substantial monetary grants that government give. My group will indeed be highlighting the information that we...
Councillor Pott, is there a question?
I don't have a question.
Oh, great. Last time you ever go, that one. Right. Oh, how do we do with this? Is three for this?
You get a supplementary.
Oh, crikey, okay. Right, Councillor Harwood, have you got a supplementary, and it's actually a proper question as well for Councillor Rose?
I have, Mr Mayor, and I will add the question.
No messing around this time.
Good evening, Councillor Rawson. Thank you for your extensive reply to my question. Councillor Rawson, I firmly believe that the residents of Derby are in favour of the assembly rooms being refurbished and reopened. Yeah. Just prior to this meeting, I got a communication from Jennifer, and she said, vote refurbishment.
Councillor Harwood, come on, we're on a question,
and use
please.
the insurance money for its proper purposes. Bring the loaned equipment back.
Should we take the next one?
Councillor Rawson, if it is the wish of the people of Derby in the consultation to refurbish and reopen the assembly rooms, will you adhere to that request? Yes or no?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Harwood. The consultation, as you rightly point out, is ongoing, and I would encourage everyone to take part in that consultation and to give us your views. And of course, we will take on board and listen to whatever the results of that comes out of that consultation, and make a decision in due course. Thank you.
Councillor Graves, do you want to ask a supplementary on the same question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Rawson, do you think it's acceptable to actually start thinking about doing something with the assembly rooms after a 4-year delay?
I think it's absolutely acceptable, Councillor Graves, to get on and deliver a new performance venue in Derby, which is something that this Labour administration is committed to. It's one of our pledges, and it's something that we're moving forward. And it's just a shame, really, that some of the opposition parties in the city, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, chose to call in the Cabinet decision to move this forward, to delay the process. And I think there are even some comments, I don't know if it was Councillor Harwood, but certainly from one of the Conservative group, that we ought to go back to the drawing board, which I think would be absolutely unacceptable to the people of Derby.
It wasn't me, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Apologies, Councillor Harwood, then. What's a member of your group, mate?
Okay, Councillor Potter, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Rawson?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Rawson, thank you for confirming that there were 159 planning enforcement referrals to be investigated to date in 2017. But as the last remaining planning enforcement officer has recently retired and the department has no plans to employ a replacement in the near future, can the Cabinet member explain how he expects to be able to address any planning enforcement issues with or for the residents of this city? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. This is a very important issue, and it's something that the head of planning and other members of the planning department will be picking up.
No, not a sausage.
Okay, Councillor Smale, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Raju?
I do, Mr Mayor. Sorry, I've got to roll these two questions into one supplementary. So, Councillor Raju, thank you very much for your reply. I was just wondering, could you not give some more clarification with the jobs that are uncertain? I don't think counselling is what is needed for the staff. I think it's actual answers to their future. And also in a recent ward meeting, Councillor Bolton said to me that there will be no job losses. Assuming Councillor Bolton meant compulsory redundancies, could you guarantee tonight that there will be no compulsory redundancies whatsoever?
Thank you, Councillor Smale, for that question. It's an issue that we've got to discuss after the 4th of December, which is a week on Monday, and I'll be happy to meet with you and any other councillor in this chamber to discuss employment rights of those affected. And it is quite refreshing to hear from the Conservatives their concern about employment, considering this week their Chancellor didn't even couldn't really tell us whether there are unemployed or employed people in this country. Thank you.
Councillor Matthew Holmes, have you got a supplementary for Councillor Rawson?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Rawson, the fine journalist from Radio Derby, Chris Deutsch, there he is. No, I genuinely mean that. I'm not. He wasn't sarcastic. He reported and published some stats that showed that in 2011-12, the weekly average footfall in St Peter Street compared to 15-16 had dropped 25%, and in East Street, again from 11-12 to 15-16, there'd been a 35% decrease in weekly footfall. Can you explain why? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes, for your question. I think it's an issue that's common to many cities across the UK. The causes are probably to do with the recession, which occurred from 2010, around that time. And also people's changing shopping habits in terms of using the internet more for their shopping. So city centres all across the country have got to reinvent themselves. It's not just about retail anymore, it's about creating a really high quality environment in a place where people want to come and meet and enjoy a range of activities in addition to shopping. So you're right, it's an issue that's affected high streets across the country, but the good news is that in the last couple of years the stats have started to turn around, and particularly with news that the Cathedral Quarter won High Street, National High Street of the Year last year, and the hard work that we're doing in terms of regenerating the city centre, those figures are starting to turn around, I'm very pleased to say.
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Banwaite?
Yes, please. As I mentioned earlier, we're beginning to see some impacts of Brexit, and I hope it's not too late for the economic assessment and strategy which you mentioned to consider the impacts of different sorts of Brexit. But Councillor Banwaite, will you write to the Prime Minister adding your voice, and if we believe that's right, please everybody, our voice here, to the calls for the government's Brexit assessments to be published, because we have some important sectors here in Derby which, if there are negative impacts, we may need to think about hard.
Well, Councillor Kerr, I don't think writing to the Prime Minister is going to help. I think the whole Brexit project is a complete mess. You know, which we're all deeply concerned about. I think what we need to be doing is actually getting on with the job of developing our own post-Brexit economic strategy, and we will be putting out to consultation post-Brexit Derby's own post-Brexit economic strategy called the Four Pillars, focused on local, regional, national and international activities. So I'd encourage you, Councillor Kerr, to get involved in that. And we are looking, I was just talking to the Chief Executive earlier on to get an update on that, but we are looking to go out to consultation on that early next year. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Raju? Councillor Willoughby, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Banwaite?
I do, Mr Mayor. How does the leader reconcile his response that this has had no impact on the management and governance of the council when the external auditors have raised governance of this council under his leadership as one of their major areas of concern. And the fact he has said that it will take £600,000 of public money, in fact, proves their point that this was cut too far and too fast in the first place, to the detriment of the efficient management of the council.
Councillor Willoughby, most, if not all, councils in the country are grappling with austerity, which you support as a national policy. Derbyshire County Council have recently putting forward their own proposals to reduce their management team. You know, if you look at the City Council's finances since austerity began, we've seen a 50% reduction in income. At the same time, overheads have gone up by 50%, and they're the figures from the Finance Director, Section 151 officer. And actually what we're seeing is us year after year delivering as an administration a balanced budget, and I'm pleased to say we've got to a balanced position again, and actually we are finding a way through a very crippling period of austerity through very bold and ambitious 50 pledges, which hopefully you're familiar with. And Councillor Rawson's talked about one of our pledges, and other Cabinet members have talked about theirs, whether it's RAM Energy or the very ambitious swimming pool project, which is starting. These projects we're delivering, and the reality is they require resources. If we didn't have those projects, actually we would need to expand the management team. But what we found, and the advice we've received from our officers over the last couple of years, when we've devised the 50 pledges, we need to make sure that we have the resources, the expert officers and the personnel to deliver on those pledges. So actually these are exciting times. It's us as an administration showing strong leadership, being ambitious and making sure that we've got the proper people in place to deliver those projects. So I'd encourage you to get on board and promote the 50 pledges, because actually it's us taking the city forward despite horrendous austerity. And as I said, whether it's the Brexit mess which this government is trying to grapple with, or it's the horrendous cuts to public services, this council is now in a strong position to take the city forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Poulter, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Banway?
I do, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, before I was interrupted, I was about to say that my question will include the fact that I welcome the fact that at least one version of the peer review from the LGA will eventually be published. I was beginning to think, Ranjit, you had decided not to publish it and maybe do something silly like pull out the LGA. Why is it that it's taken this long to come to this point, that the response remains in draft form only, and will we get to see any of the 3 or 4 other drafts that you've been working on before you publish it? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
The report will be available. I'm not sure why you're getting so excited about it. It's a peer report as any other council does, and it's something we've requested to be done so we can continue to develop as a local authority. And actually, we embrace and welcome feedback. Any good organisation surely does.
Right, thank you. Councillor Smale, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Raju?
I do, Mr Mayor, thank you. Councillor Raju, would you consider changing your strategy if any bids received on the 4th of December are not compliant with option B+?
Thank you once again, Councillor Smale. You're very keenly interested in the libraries. Yes, as we all are. Yeah. The issue is we've had a debate on the libraries. It's gone to Cabinet. Option B+ has been approved, and we have a deadline of December the 4th. We will have that conversation again, and I'll bring any particular library back to Cabinet on an individual case-by-case basis. So you have my assurance there. Remember our pledge. We will protect libraries from closure.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary for Councillor Russell? No? Okay, thank you.
Mr Mayor, under CP 42R, I would like to speak on an urgent matter.
One more question.
There is one more question. The final question is Councillor Graves, supplementary for Councillor Afzal.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I understand that the Council has agreed a temporary fix, which was suggested, a fix that was suggested in 2015. Do you think it's reasonable that we haven't accepted that in 2015 and that it's now being implemented today?
Thank you for your supplementary, Councillor Graves. But we've actually got legal looking at this. The time... I'm sorry, I've got to speak a bit closer. Right, can you hear me now? Okay, we've got legal looking into this. The court case came in on the 20th of April 2017. Court ruling under the terms of the order, work must be commenced within 24 weeks. It's going to that. We've got our officers looking into it. We will be keeping an eye on it, and hopefully I feel for the residents around Alveston. Quite a few have actually been in touch with me, and we're trying to resolve the issue as quick as we can. And in future, Councillor Graves, I'm quite happy to talk to you any time rather than just wait for a full council meeting to discuss any issues that you do have. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, under CP 42R, I would like to speak on an urgent matter.
Sorry. You've had a couple of months to put it on.
Under CP 42R, I believe I am able to speak on an urgent matter, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, with my consent. Okay, sorry.
Can I proceed, Mr. Mayor?
Item 10 is minute 75 of 17, Council Cabinet requiring approval of Council. Anyone wish to move that one? Yeah, okay. Move, okay. Item 11, appointment of statutory co-optees to Children and Young People Scrutiny Review Board. Is that just a move? Yeah? Okay. Item 12, Corporate Parenting Committee, Terms of Reference. Yeah? Are we done? Okay, in that case, that ends the meeting.